Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at excerpts you all chose from Steve DeShazer's Words Were Originally Magic.
Ooh, that's a great title.
Yeah, I know, right? And it really gets at what we're going to be looking at today, how language, especially in therapy, can be even more powerful than we realize.
Well, and DeShazer starts off by referencing a question Freud himself had. Have words lost their magic? But his answer takes us in a really different direction.
It does. Okay, so we all use words every day, right? But how often do we stop and think about how they actually shape our view of things, especially our problems?
That's such a good question. And that's really where DeShazer's ideas get interesting. He argues that language isn't just some neutral tool for conveying information. It's this active force that can both reflect and create change.
Especially in therapy, right?
Yes, exactly.
One of the things I love is how he compares therapists to storytellers.
Oh,
He
yeah.
talks about how a Freudian, a systemic therapist, and an Ericksonian therapist might each listen to the same client's story. But they'll end up telling completely different versions of it.
And what's really interesting is that they aren't trying to change the story, right? Each of these therapists is working within their own theoretical framework,
Right.
which acts like a lens.
A filter.
Yes, a filter that shapes how they hear and interpret what the client's saying.
So is like each therapist has a different colored lens they're looking through. Like the client's experience is the landscape, but the color, the way we understand that landscape comes from the therapist's perspective.
Oh, that is such good analogy.
Oh, try.
That's fantastic. And this leads into Shazer's critique of the whole deep structure concept,
Okay.
which is the idea that what a client says is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's some deeper hidden truth that we had to get to solve the real problem.
So it's like there's this secret code we have to crack to uncover the truth.
Well, that's the traditional way of thinking about it. But Shazer, drawing on post-structuralist thinkers like Lacan and Derrida, he argues against this idea of a fixed deep structure. He says meaning isn't static. It's constantly being created and recreated based on the context of the conversation.
Oh, so it's fluid.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does that play out in therapy, though? If there's not one right interpretation, doesn't that make things kind of chaotic?
It's not about chaos. It's about understanding that meaning can change. And that's actually where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Misunderstandings, which are bound to happen in any conversation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They become opportunities for new meaning to come out.
Have you ever had one of those conversations where you miscommunicated with someone, but it actually led to some sort of breakthrough?
All the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most productive conversations come from those moments where we realize we're not actually on the same page.
Exactly. So how does DeShazer see this magic of misunderstanding at work in therapy? Well,
Right.
he compares a bunch of different approaches.
Like, he contrasts excerpts from sessions with therapists like Ackerman, who's very power-driven, always interpreting the client's actions. Then there's Gustafson, who's looking for those missing puzzle pieces in the client's story,
Yeah.
trying to complete the puzzle. But it's Weakland, representing the brief therapy school, who has a very different approach.
And he's not so much into dissecting the problem. If I remember right, he's more interested in those times when the problem doesn't show up.
Yes.
Like those exceptions
You-
that might show us what the solutions could be.
Instead of getting stuck on what's not working, Weakland focuses on what is working, even if it's just a little bit.
Okay.
It's all about using those small wins to create solutions with the client.
Wouldn't that be like avoiding the problem? Like, are we really addressing the root cause if we're only focused on the solution?
That's a great question, and it's something DeShazer really tackles head on.
Yeah.
He's not saying we should ignore the problem altogether. It's more about recognizing that spending all our time in problem talk can actually keep us from making progress.
Stuck.
Yes, exactly. By focusing on solutions, we open up all these new possibilities for change.
Okay.
And sometimes, just by focusing on the solution, you end up addressing those underlying issues naturally.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we're not looking for some deep, hidden truth,
Right.
then how do we even begin to understand the client's experience?
This is where DeShazer's idea of taking the client seriously comes in.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they're saying,
Right.
but it's about really listening to their language, noticing patterns, exceptions, and even small changes in how they're describing things. Their words are clues to understanding their unique experience and what they want.
This is making me think about how we use metaphors in therapy.
Yeah.
Like the therapist is kind of looking for the metaphors the client's already using to describe their world,
Right.
and then building off of those metaphors to create a shared understanding.
That's such a good observation.
Yeah.
Metaphors are really powerful because they tap into the client's own way of making sense of their experience.
Right.
Shazer takes this idea even further with his use of scales in therapy.
The scales. I was wondering when we would get to those. I remember reading about this. It's
Yeah.
not about measuring how bad the problem is, right?
Oh, not at all. He uses the scales as a way for clients to express their progress in a way that feels empowering to them.
Okay.
Like there's this one example in the book where he's working with a client with an eating disorder,
Okay.
and she's feeling all this pressure to eat more, but the scale gives her a way to express her control and progress.
Okay.
Even if it's just eating one meal a day,
Right.
it becomes less about external pressure and more about internal motivation.
That's interesting. So the scales are more about communication and collaboration than judging or assessing the client.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads us to one of Shazer's most famous techniques, the miracle question.
Oh, yes. The miracle question.
Suppose tonight a miracle happens and the problem is solved. How would you know? It's almost like a magic spell.
It is.
The great thing about this question is that it skips over all that problem talk and lets the client imagine their ideal future.
Right.
They start describing details, actions, feelings, all the things that would be there in a world without the problem.
I love that example he gives about the client struggling with depression.
Yes.
When he asks her the miracle question, she starts talking about laughing more, going out with friends, even just waking up feeling better.
It's like the question gives her permission to imagine a life outside of that darkness.
It does.
And by describing it, putting it into words, it becomes more real.
More attainable.
Yes. It's like she's starting to write a new story for herself.
This reminds me of what you were talking about earlier with taking the client seriously.
Right.
It seems like it's not just about listening, but also helping them to find the words to describe the change they want to see.
Absolutely. That's where the therapist's language is so important. By asking good questions and reframing things, the therapist can help the client see their strengths and resources.
So they become this guide helping the client to navigate their experience and figure out how to get to where they want to be.
Exactly. That's what's so empowering about Shazer's approach. It's not about the therapist having all the answers.
Right.
It's about giving the client the space to discover their own solutions.
Their own wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's all about working together, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Like that case he talks about with the retired school teacher who is dealing with depression.
Right.
By using the miracle question, he's able to picture himself having a much more active life.
You know, what's interesting in that case is that he's already doing some of those things.
He is.
Yeah, like teaching little groups here and there, working on a book. But he sees all of that as just fighting against the depression,
Oh.
not as signs that he's actually making progress.
So he's so focused on the problem that he can't even see the solution he's already creating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the therapist's language, the way they use words to kind of reframe things,
Right.
can be so powerful. They can help the client see their strengths.
It's like they're shining a light on all those tiny victories.
Yes.
Those exceptions so the client can actually see them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shazer talks about constructing stories of success.
Okay.
It's not about pretending the problems aren't there.
Right.
It's about focusing on those times when things are going well,
Yeah.
no matter how small they seem.
Yeah, because even those small moments can be really powerful.
They are.
They show the client what's possible, even when it feels like they're stuck.
Exactly. It's like those small moments become the foundation for change.
Yeah.
They change the whole story from struggle to possibility.
Like that example where the therapist tells the client to only speak English with his wife when they go on vacation.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
That one tiny suggestion really helped him break out of his normal patterns.
It's a great example of how therapists can use these really creative interventions,
Yeah.
which are usually based on the client's own words and experiences,
Right.
to make real change.
Oh, and what about that example from Cologne,
Yes.
where Shazer's working with a client with some pretty serious health problems?
Right.
They used a scale to discuss her progress, but her goal was just to stay healthy.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting.
It's a really important point, I think. Progress isn't always this straight line or something huge and noticeable.
Right.
Sometimes just being able to hold steady, to maintain things,
Right.
that's a big win.
It shows how important it is to meet the client where they are
Yes,
and go from there.
exactly. It's about celebrating those tiny victories, those squeaking into a 5 moments.
Squeaking into a 5.
Yeah, but that's something Shazer says to describe those times when the client's making progress.
Okay.
But it's subtle, you know.
Right.
It's like they're barely tipping the scale in their favor, but that little bit can make a world of difference.
Oh, I love that. Sneaky progress. It's encouraging, especially for those who are feeling stuck.
It really emphasizes that change doesn't always happen overnight. It
Right.
can be gradual, almost sneaky.
Yeah, and sometimes it's those really subtle shifts that end up having the biggest impact.
I think so.
Going back to the book,
Yeah.
there's that example with the woman who was a gardener, right?
Yes.
And Shazer uses that metaphor to look at how she handles problem.
She starts off describing herself as being stuck at a really negative point on the scale.
Okay.
But then as they talk, she starts to show all these times when she's been competent and confident.
Oh, so it's like she was discovering hidden strengths.
Yes. She didn't even realize she had them.
That's so cool.
And the therapist picks up on those details and uses them to help her shift her focus.
Right, from the problems to the possibilities.
Exactly. He even gives her this playful little assignment
Oh, what's that?
to flip a coin every day.
Okay.
And if it lands on heads, she has to spend an hour doing something she enjoys and really savor that experience.
I love that. Such a creative intervention.
It is. And it encourages her to get out of her comfort zone and try something new.
A different way of being.
Exactly. And it's all based on her own words and what she wants.
Right.
He's not telling her what to do.
Right.
He's helping her figure out what she already knows deep down.
Which brings us back to the idea that words have power,
They do.
that language can transform things.
Shazer believed that words were originally magic.
He did.
Not in some supernatural sense,
Right.
but in the way that they have the power to shape our realities and create change.
He saw therapy as this collaboration between the therapist and the client,
Yes.
where they work together to create a new, more hopeful story.
A story that acknowledges the challenges,
Yeah.
but really focuses on the possibilities, those exceptions, those times when things are good.
Those moments of strength and resilience.
Yes. And those moments can be found anywhere,
They can.
even in the hardest situations.
That's true.
Shazer encourages us to look for those exceptions, those clues to the client's potential to change.
Because they show us what could be.
Exactly. And when we focus on those moments, when we amplify them,
Yeah.
we can start to change the whole story.
From problem to possibility.
Exactly.
This is almost like a whole different way of thinking about therapy.
It is, in a way. It's like shifting gears.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on the problems, we focus on solutions.
And instead of getting stuck in the past, we look to the future.
Exactly. And a big part of that is through language, the stories we tell.
The stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other.
Right. It's about understanding that language isn't just describing reality.
Right.
It's actually shaping it.
Like we're creating a new reality as we talk.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. Shazer was really interested in how we could use language to create change.
Yeah.
Even in really difficult situations.
Like that client who was struggling with alcohol abuse.
Oh, right.
Instead of seeing it as a disease, Shazer looked at how his drinking was connected to what was happening in his life.
He said we can't separate people's behavior from their environment.
Their context.
Yes, exactly. And when we understand that context, then we can start to see how we can change things.
So it's less about willpower
Right.
and more about changing the environment so it supports the changes they want to make.
That's it.
I remember Shazer asked that client, what are you going to do instead?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't about judging him.
No.
It was about getting him to think about other things he could do.
Right. Other activities that could replace the drinking.
Like, let's imagine your life without drinking. What would you do?
Exactly. Just opening up the possibilities.
And sometimes those new perspectives can come from the most unexpected places.
They can.
Like that young woman with the eating disorder who was also pregnant.
Oh, wow. That's a tough situation.
It was.
Yeah.
But Shazer really focused on her fear of being alone,
Okay.
which seemed to be a big part of what she was struggling with.
Yeah.
I thought it was amazing how he just validated her experience and helped her think about other ways to cope.
Yeah. He didn't dismiss her fear.
Right.
He worked with it.
Exactly. And they used the scales to help her figure out what progress would look like for her.
Right.
Even if it was just eating one meal a day.
Right.
Or admitting that she was afraid.
Those small steps show that she's changing how she's thinking.
That she's ready to do the work.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even tiny changes can make a difference.
And lead to bigger changes later on.
And that brings us back to those exceptions we were talking about.
The times when the problem isn't there.
Right. Shazer thought those exceptions were so important.
Yeah.
They showed how the client could change.
Because they show what's possible.
Yeah. They show how strong and resilient the client is.
And when we pay attention to those moments and make them bigger,
we can change the story.
We shift things from problems to possibilities.
That's the power of language.
It really is. It's all about how we use words to make sense of ourselves and the world.
Shazer said, words were originally magic.
He did.
And he didn't mean magic like something supernatural.
Yeah.
He meant that they have the power to change our realities.
It's about being thoughtful about the words we choose, asking good questions.
And really listening.
Really listening to the stories our clients are telling us.
When we do that, we create the space for people to heal.
To grow and to really change.
It's been such a great conversation going through Shazer's work with you.
It has. His ideas are challenging, but they're also really hopeful.
I think he gives us a whole new way of looking at therapy.
Yeah.
And the power of language to make a difference.
He encourages us to stay curious.
To be creative.
To be playful even.
Yeah.
And to always be looking for better ways to help our clients reach their goals.
So what's the main takeaway you hope people get from this deep dive? If words really are magic, how can we use them to make positive change in our own lives and the lives of others?
I think the biggest takeaway is that language gives us the power to shape our own realities. When we pay attention to the words we use,
the stories we tell,
we can start to see things differently.
To imagine new possibilities.
And to create the change we want.
That's a great message to leave people with.
I think so too. So, to everyone listening out there, we encourage you to go check out Shazer's work.
Yeah, see what you think.
Maybe it will inspire you to start your own journey of transformation.
And until next time,
keep diving deep.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.